Shalom, shalom, shalom to everyone. This is Rabbi Moshe Otero, and today is Friday. It's the eve of Shabbat. I want to welcome you this morning. Getting started here, even with my throat. Um, very um, interesting week, without to say the least. And of course, we're coming from a very negative experience coming out from um, Tisha B'Av, which until this day we're still on the 10th, and thus still certain limitations in what we should be able to eat. And I think Rabbi Tahan, who I've put on our different social media, explained the halacha regarding that. And I think one of his best messages was on Tisha B'Av itself, calling us to remind us that history repeats itself. Without a doubt, it does in many different ways. And I want to thank Rabbi Tahan, Rabbi Ephraim Goldberg, and other rabbis that I put on our Ways of Israel link. These are great men of Torah learning. And we had, of course, in this past week, the passing of a great man that influenced me. Many of you may have known him, Rabbi Abraham de Leon Cohen, who was asked that I basically preside to the Levaya. And it was very hard for me, but was able to fulfill it. This man was a very unique man in regards to reaching out to others and showing the love of a rabbi towards so many other people who needed to come in or to return, areas of Shavim. And hopefully soon we'll open up the Barbanel Foundation, which he had made me the vice president of. And now, unfortunately, and I say unfortunately because he was unique in the way he did his outreach and his Torah teachings. Incredible man, dearly loved man, which I will definitely miss in this work. He was really a maverick in the areas of the Anusim. And so you'll see on my different Facebook pages my words about him, and hopefully his legacy we will be able to continue with God's help and your help as well, to be able to move forward. And one of the persons that have been very instrumental in really opening up the issues of Anusim is a lady that many of you know, who got really started when we did our first annual Anusim conference here in Florida. And her name is Jeannie Milgram, who have written a book, actually about 5 or 6 books, and now working on doing a movie about her life story. She's married to Rabbi Michael Milgram, incredible rabbi, a thinker there, and belongs to the Young Israel in the Kendall area. So all of these people, Professor Lavender, who also passed away last year, I was informed, these were a group of people who basically worked arduously for the sake of the Anusim and brought in a lot of people in as a result of their work in regards to their scholarly work as well. And there's so many good rabbis out there. I cannot say that we are bereft of rabbis, of good rabbis. There are good rabbis, good teachers, good instructors, good guides, good people, no doubt about it. So I can't say and put a pointing finger, because I know it's going to be pointed right back at me. And it makes me feel very privileged to be surrounded with so many good rabbis in our community. You have even the rabbi of B'nai Sephardi. You have Rabbi Lazary also in the Hollywood area. You have so many good rabbis. I mean, if you can't find a rabbi today, at least in Florida, really there is a lot of good quality rabbis out there. Rabbis who love Kalal Yisrael, who goes out beyond their abilities and means to help a fellow Jew, a fellow human being. And you see that constantly. At least I've been able to witness that constantly in the Jewish world. Now, you do have those, but they basically I can't say anything about, so not to speak Lashon Hara. And I'll leave that at that. Those who basically I have tried to stay away from, and I've asked our administrators and leaders and so forth to do not cater to them, because obviously they maybe have a big intellect, but it's not only the intellect that's important, it also has to do with the way they walk with what they know. And that's where we bring people of peace, people of integrity, people that love God. One thing Rabbi Ephraim Goldberg saying is, do you really want Geula? So if you really want Geula, you've got to start with yourself, with you. Start examining your way of conducing yourself and so forth. Now, we have been started this series of Sefer Haikkarim now for several months, and we are on the last chapter. I mean, the last book, but we're still just getting through this last book of Sefer Haikkarim. We're on chapter 11 today, so I want you to join me, and also want to invite you to be part of the Ways of Israel. We do obviously need funding. We need your support. I don't know of any Torah institution that can be able to operate with a zero budget. And this is why I try to emphasize that without money, things can't go forward. As a matter of fact, we see that even in our reality today. Without money, there is no ability to be able to grow, to be able to strengthen the teachings and so forth. Now, as we find that God provides in various ways for several species of animals in order that the species may reach the most perfect form that is possible for it, so it is reasonable to suppose that he similarly provides for every individual human being according to his degree and worth in order that he may reach his proper perfection. Now, in the lower animals, we see that God has provided for every one of the animal species in a wonderful manner, in giving them all the perfections of which they are capable. This is evident in every one of the animal species. God gave them members and organs and faculties, and calculated to preserve the species so that it may have the permanent existence in a perfect manner. Take as an example the horned animal that eats grass. The material intended for the teeth was used up in the formation of the horns, and the nature was not able to make teeth for them in the upper jaws, as a consequence of which they cannot masticate their food properly. Hence, nature gave them the power to chew the cud in order that they might complete in the second mastication what was left undone in the first. Again, those animals that can find food readily digest their food quickly, as for example as the fish and the fowl, as the rabbis say. In the case of the fowl and fish, their food is digested in the time it takes them to be consumed and thrown into the fire. The dog, on the other hand, who can find food readily, digests his food slowly, as the rabbis say, commenting on the verse, "The righteous taketh knowledge of the cause of the poor." And God knows that the dog cannot find insufficiency, and therefore he makes his food stay in his bowels 3 days. Beasts and birds of prey which do not feed on plants are provided by nature with organs which enable them to feed on what they catch, and with a poison in their claws which they inject into the fish of the animal they kill, and which cooks the food and grinds it. The view of the poison in its heat takes place with the fire and prepares the flesh for food. And from nature of the ant, which is a tiny creature, is yet so active, we can find a form, an idea of God in wisdom and providence, taking care of all of existing things and every part of them. The camel is provided with a long neck proportional to the length of his thighs, and so that he may be able to pick up his food easily. And the camel is provided with a long neck and proportion so that he may be able to pick up his food very easily. All of these are examples, says Rabbi Albo, indeed instances of divine providence. So we see where providence picks up in providing all creatures their sustenance, touching the genius of the species. And nevertheless, we can infer from the existence of divine providence in relation to individuals as human species. We find that in the mode of provision varies in different species in accordance with that which every species requires to attain its perfection, and accordingly to its temperament and nature, it provided with organs for its protection and procuring of food in order that they may attain and means of perfection intended for it. Those animals which requires a special care, like the young calves, or provided with food, we never see ravens die of hunger. The roe is protected and provided for this at the same time of its birth, not one of them being without protection at the time, as the rabbis say. The roe has a narrow uterus, therefore God sends her to make at a time she has to give birth, which bites her. We find similar instances of providence in the various animal species. This proves conclusively that there is one who provides existing things and gives to each one what is needed for its perfection, as its nature requires and according to its capacity, and not one thing is deprived of that which is in need and capable of receiving. But human individuals, they differ more widely among themselves in respects to the degree of their rational power, other than animal species differs from another. For individuals is almost on a level with irrational animals. And while another approach the degrees of angels, hence it follows that the divine providence must vary with individuals in human species as it varies with species of animal kingdom. And it follows from that which is difference between one individual and another in the matter of providence depends upon the difference in their perfection and worth. Hence a person may have a high degree of perfection that providence takes care of him, and God communicates with the person himself in a prophetic revelation or in a dream. Now, prophetic revelation is illustrated as in the case of Abraham, to whom God said, "Get thee out of thy country, and I will make of thee a great nation." Communication is in a dream is illustrated in the case of Abimelech, who was told in the dream of night, "Behold, thou shalt die because of the woman whom thou hast taken." I wish people would listen to what the Torah says here. When you take and decides to take a woman that has been already married and have a relationship, you're dealing with the penalty of death. And this is why we're seeing so much death. And yet we read this happened with even Abraham. That Abimelech, who was the Pharaoh, took Sarah with that same intention. And Pharaoh, who said was a wicked man, received the divine communication in the shapes of plagues, as the Bible says. And the Lord plagued the Pharaoh and his house with great plagues. And I wonder sometimes, looking at our own leaders here in the United States, how even the one that's right now, quote-unquote, president, basically did the same thing. Took a woman that was married and basically stole this other man's wife, unbeknownst to him. So what we have right now is, you might say, the payment of their sin made publicly well known. And obviously that affects all the children's and so forth. This is why we have so many messed up family members, or dysfunctional family members. Divine communication in the shape of plagues, as the Bible says, and the Lord plagued Pharaoh and his house with great plagues. And unfortunately, we here in the United States, we are receiving these type of plagues as a result of the leadership that we have appointed and accepted into this country. We have to start electing leaders that represent good moral values, not the one that we have right now. And sometimes the divine communication comes to a person through the message of a prophet, as it came to Barak, the son of Abinoam, through Deborah or Eli, or Shaul, or through Samuel. Sometimes, again, a person occupies a lower grade and the divine communication comes to him neither in a prophetic revelation nor through the message of a prophet, but through a divine impulsion, such as Judah experienced when he turned aside to visit the daughter-in-law of Tamar. The divine purpose being that Perez and Zerach should be his descendants, and the impulse which came to Abigail to go out to meet David, who knew that it was divine in origin, and therefore he said, "Blessed be the Lord God of Israel, who sent thee this day to meet me." Or the impulse which came to some of the judges to go out and fight and save Israel. Sometimes also such a divine impulsion comes to a person so that God may punish him for the previous sin, like the impulse which came to Achav to go out to fight, the purpose being that he should be killed as a punishment of the death of Naboth. And there are so many illustrations of this kind. In other words, everything happens because of divine providence. So we cannot negate that God is the one in charge of everything that happens in this world. You know, when I was in that process of bearing Abraham de Leon Cohen and also seeing the midst of life of so many people who this past year passed, it was like, I would say hundreds of thousands of people. And I asked myself, God, until when will you finish up with death? When will we see the end of death and the beginning of the resurrection? And sometimes when persons are afflicted with sufferings in the shape of sickness and imprisonment and the like, such either a warning that they should abandon their evils in which they are enmeshed and return to God, or in order to wipe out a few sins which they have committed, sufferings of the last kind are used to test those who serve God. If the motives of their service is love, they will accept the suffering gracefully for the love of God. But if the motive of their service is fear of punishment and love of reward, they will grumble against God's treatment of them, and say improper things about him. Why did God do this? Oh, God is unfair. No, as Job did. Job was God-fearing man, but he served God from love of reward and fear of punishment. Therefore, when he was afflicted with suffering, he grumbled against God's judgment. Elihu, in his first speech, explained to him this type of divine communication in a dream and in a vision of the night when deep sleep falleth upon men. Then he opens the ears of the men, and by their chastisement seals in the decrees. The men put away their purpose, and that he may hide the body from man. The meaning is this: that sometimes divine communication may come to a person in a dream in order to turn him aside from evil deed in which he is entangled, and to conceal from him the corporal interests, and so to withhold his soul from the pit. So he goes on and say that sometimes the divine communication may be made through illness. He is chastised, also with a pain upon his head in bed, and all of his bones grow stiff, and he is punished with great pain. He is described at length the pain that he suffers through sickness. Then says, he prayeth unto the Lord, and he is favorable unto him. So he seeth his face with joy, and he restores unto man his righteousness. The meaning is that when he prays unto God, he shows him favor and restores him righteousness unto him. He credits him with knowledge that his illness was the effect of his sins, and therefore he returns to God and acknowledged before him in a great assembly in the seat of the elders that his sins were cause of his illness. He recognizes his failure, and he comes before men and says, I have sinned and perverted that which was right. And this is accounted to him as a credit, not as a negative. Similarly, in the last speech, Elihu says that sometimes suffering of a different kind come upon men like imprisonment, in order to rouse him up that he may turn away from his sins in which he is caught. And they be bound in fetters and behold him in cords of affliction, and then declares unto them their work, that their transgression, that they have behaved themselves proudly. He opens also their ears to discipline and commandments that they turn from iniquity. They finally get it. It is God who basically opens up the understanding so they can realize what's happening to you as a result of the punishment for your sins. And then he concludes the subject, if they hearken and serve him, and they shall spend their days in prosperity. But if they hearken not, they shall perish by the sword. But they that are insincere in heart lay up anger, and they cry not for help when he is bind up. The meaning is that when sufferings such as imprisonment and the like came upon a person, it's a divine communication to a man that he should turn away from his sins, and also a way to finding out whether he accepts his suffering gracefully as a punishment for his sins. If he returns to God and serves him, God will reward him. If they hearken and serve him, they shall spend their days in prosperity, says Rabbi Alba. But if they hearken not, they shall perish by the sword, etc. If one does not accept his sufferings gracefully and does not believe in the admonition to return to God, he is doomed to the sword and will expire without knowledge. But they that are insincere in heart lay up anger. They cry not for help when he is binding them. The meaning is that those who serve God insincerely, the insincere in heart, alluding to Job, are exceedingly angry with God for having inflicted suffering upon them, as Job was angry, and do not return to God. They cry not for help when he bindeth them. Hence their soul perishes in youth, and their life as that of a depraved person. The afflicted man is delivered from these sufferings through his affliction. So when you're going through afflictions and troubles and problems in your life, count that as joy. Count that as an opportunity for you to get closer to God, your Creator. Since he has endured the suffering of affliction, he delivers the afflicted by his affliction and opens their ear by tribulation. That is, through the tribulation which he suffered on the account of the affliction, he opens their ears that they should return to God, and there is no need of imprisonment or suffering. But if one does not return to God despite his sufferings, and regards them as a matter of chance, an accident, and not as a matter of punishment for his sins, then the Bible tells us that the punishment for that is, if ye will walk with me as though your sufferings were an accident, then I will walk with you in the same manner until you understand that it is not an accident. In other words, what you're suffering is not an accident. It is a providential design to help you come closer to God and get back to God and get back to belief and practice of what God commands all of us, the children of God. So my friends, Rabbi Alba comes to understand that providence, even suffering. Keep in mind that as Rabbi Alba is speaking, he is transitioning through a period of hellish false accusation by the church of that time. The Inquisition, the very power of being put to trial and being burned at the stake were the threats. And as you know, many Jews were not able to hold up to that test. Some did, and were able, fortunately, to leave Spain, to leave the country that was menacing to them, and were able to escape with their faith intact with no problem. But many, many thousands of Jews remained back to try to survive the situation, and by force were forced to basically accept a faith that was not theirs. And thus we hear the story of the Inquisition and the arm and the disaster and the hatred. And we just come out from learning Tisha B'Av and the great harm that they have done to God's people. But even all of the suffering that all of Israel have suffered till this day is all for good. Everything, Gam Zula Tova, is for, even this is good. because God has in mind good planned for all of his children, in particular those who God has chosen to be part of his people, the children of Israel. I hope you enjoyed this morning's shiur, and we will continue until we finish the fourth book of Sefer Haikkarim. And I'm going to ask you, please, be part of the ways of Israel. Give what you can, but give today. We are now coming again up to the end of the month situation, which we have to meet our budget of $1,500, and I mentioned that every time, every opportunity. Today, if you hear God nugging at your heart, saying, yeah, give a tzedakah to Rabbi Moshe Otero's organization, Los Caminos de Israel, Ways of Israel, would you please do it? And do it with contentment, do it with happiness, that you're partnering up with us in this very holy task of teaching Judaism, teaching the ways of the Lord to the general public, to bring this up. Right now we are in a spiritual battle in this country, one which we have not seen the like of it, where we have even those that are in the party trying to remove and destroy our religious freedoms and begin a sense of persecution. In addition to that, we have people who are in power who happen to be parts of the tribesmen and are basically desecrating God's name while utilizing the position and power to basically benefit themselves and harm, yes, my friends, harm the Jewish community throughout the United States and the world. And unfortunately, we're seeing this take place right before us as we go through Tisha B'Av. Don't think that things cannot change in 1 second. Things could turn out to be another, God forbid, Holocaust taking place here in the United States if we allow the continuance of this current administration to move in the direction that they're moving, which is not good, my friends. I'm going to say very clearly, it's not a good direction. And I hope that you would hear what's coming out of my heart, which is a warning to all Israel, to all Jews. And this is within the divine providence, which is something that we need to take seriously in matter and seriously in concern, because many of you have always asked, those of you who are survivors of the Holocaust, the questions you have always asked is, why did God allow the Holocaust to happen? Why did God do that? Although we have it in our Torah, in the Tochacha, part of that answer, yet we still wonder why. Why? What is it? This turned out for many Jews to walk away from Torah, to say, I'm not going to believe in God anymore. And yet there is an agreement, there is a contract upon the Jewish people that if you don't do what God says, well, I have something else in store for you. And so we try to speak either harshly or nicely, kindly, or sometimes very rough. But the bottom line is, when we take upon ourselves the commitment of living a Torah-filled life and are happy with it, we are going to have suffering. We're going to have problems. I mean, everybody has problems, but our problems will be diminuted when we do it out of joy, out of love of God, out of simcha, out of the understanding that everything that comes our way is for good. Even the death of a righteous man, even the death of loved ones, it turns out that in fact we need to learn one thing: dependence upon the Creator, and that the Creator provides provision throughout providence. So help us out. Be part of that provisional blessing to the ways of Israel. Los Caminos Israel. May God bless you and yours this Shabbat and for every day of this week. Shabbat Shalom.